Hello friends, it's Luke the Gamer Duke. Way back in the day in Diablo 2 LOD, I played my fair share of barbs, pallies, sorceresses, necros, and some druids. But one character, and more specifically one build, I never really played was the Javazon. It was also considered one of the more OP builds in the game. So I wanted to see how OP she is. What are the pitfalls? Where does she struggle? Or does she just blast through the entire game? Let's go find out. We all know where this is eventually leading to, but before we get there, we have to start here. For the sake of avoiding the struggle bus with certain aspects, I'll allow myself access to some support equipment with affixes like life, mana, resistances, run perks, and so forth. Since we're rocking the Javelin build, she will henceforth be known as Javazonia. Let's begin. I knew I would mostly blast through Act 1 since my starting Jav has massive throw damage, and blast through I did. I mostly stuck to the trails, but when I did venture off, I chucked javelins at absolutely everything, and mobs of devilkins, beasts, and rogues were easy peasy work. One thing I did notice right away though is how many javelins you go through, and stocked up on extras before heading to Cain. Reaching level 6 with Power Strike and Poison Jav made the journey even easier. I stocked up on more Javs, freed Cain, and continued through the grasslands with ease. I pushed through the barracks for Charcy's hammer, where I discovered high health, high damage enemies might become a task for the Javazon. But at least I got a decent imbue out of it. And continued forth to destroy the jail. And descended the catacombs where...
I'm not locked in here with you. But you're locked in here with me.
By far and large was taking everybody out. I figured Indariel would provide my first real challenge. With only a couple points into Power Strike, providing max damage at over 100, she was destroyed in just 16 seconds, which is actually pretty hilarious. Now that I have some levels and stats, I went to equip some support gear for the sake of moving forward in a more timely fashion, with a Death's Partial, an Angelic Partial, and runes for stealth, but I'll find the base myself. I stocked up on some new and old throwers, and descended the sewers, which Power Strike utterly destroyed everyone. I did decide to get rid of poison though, as I wasn't investing much into it and its damage was kinda teetering. No worries though, Power Strike was great. I ventured into the desert where I strolled through at my own leisure. One quick aside though, it would be really great if we could get some updated pathing. It just really is the little things, isn't it? Anyway, Power Strike combined with throwing was hilariously OP here. I one-shot my way through the Maggot Lair and 3-shot Cold Worm. Blasted through the Lost City and defeated Fangskin all in record time. Before hitting the Arcane, Farah had this 2-socket ring mail and decided it was time. I also swapped out my Angelic Partial for a Vidala Partial, specifically the boots. And as I continued through the Arcane and the Tombs, Power Strike's lightning damage range was so vast for so early that everyone was dispatched with only a couple hits. Ariel, on the other hand, was more like the Smith from Act 1. It was a stick and move situation. I fired off as many Power Strikes as I could before bailing to heal, which was working, but finally decided enough was enough, held my ground, and Power Striked him down, possibly binging a few potions in the process. Before Act 3, I decided I wanted a bit better shield, so I brought over Stormguild for blocking and Eyeless for some mana regen. Act 3 was essentially a repeat of Act 2. Still pushing the lightning route, Power Strike had me one-shotting my way through the entire jungle. The Flare jungle was a little more dangerous, mainly because I was paying more attention to the map than where I was going, and nearly walked into a trap or two. But even the rogue mobs in the Ruined Temple melted before my eyes from the lightning-fast lightning damage. Having made it to the Trav, I figured the High Council at least would challenge me here. And boy was I wrong. Power Strike is insane. Endurance was handled with such light work that I questioned if I had ever had an easier time before. Maybe with a pally? In reaching Mephisto though, it was no question. I have never dropped his health this quickly during a first-time playthrough. I do acknowledge the caveats of my gear, poison res and cannot be frozen, are assisting here, but loss of potions and time would otherwise be the only difference. Power Strike is straight up OP, and went right into Act 4. Which is usually where you face a hard damage check. But not this time. I found the plane's entrance right away and began the process of poking my way through. Azul took some effort. Granted, the effort came more from my potion chugging than actual attacking, but he eventually fell and continued blasting my way through the city and found the river right away. Which turned into a bit more of a slog simply due to enemy volume and lack of hard AoE effectiveness on my end. Another issue to compensate for by this point is how mana heavy I'd become. Mana was completely sucked dry while using Storm Guild. I really needed mana leech or mana per kill to avoid downing potions. But ask and you shall receive. Super potions appear in normal? I had no idea. I entered the sanctuary with confidence and was immediately chased away. But when fighting on my terms, I countered back. I had to kite some of the denser mobs, but Power Strike was still murking everyone. After Infector and company were dispatched, it was time for Diablo to try his hand. His lightning and fire damage were rough, per usual, and his attacks were constantly on my heels. But with some maneuvering, Power Strike took out Diablo without requiring a single trip to town. I've now gone nearly 3 full acts using basically only Power Strike, and knowing Lightning Jab was for certain later on, I decided Act 5 would be a good time to respec to try out Poison. I was also kind of tired of only using jabs for stabbing when they were built for, throwing. Distributed Poison, but also kept Power Strike for the inevitable immunities, and to my surprise, Poison jabs worked pretty well. With a few well-placed tosses, I vomited poison all over Shank and his goons, and they fell with ease. Testing poison versus the beasts, it seemed to function. So I really put it to the test, and it did not disappoint. If there's any criticism, it was a bit slow acting, which proved its point going against Frozenstein. And again, even harder at Nelothak's Temple. Mass poison resistance. Exactly what I was fearing. The Reanimated have a base poison res of 70 to 90 in normal, which, as you can see, nullified my poison damage very well. I thank the foresight I had to put the number of points in the Power Strike that I did and worked my way through. I continued through the trail in Tundra where poison was allowed to dominate. And each additional point into Poison Jab and Plague were huge boosts to damage. I pushed into the Ancient's Way where poison continued to function and came across a life and poison damage charm. What luck. I wasn't exactly sure what to expect from the Ancients, but stocked up on some spare potions and jabs and had at 'em. And overall, poison wrecked them. Took some dips, ducks, and dives, but kept them enveloped in poison, which wore them down quicker than I thought, and used Power Strike to finish them off. I walked my way through the World Stone and was face to face with Bale. His minions actually took some work, with poison falling a bit short versus all of them. I had to stack poison jabs hard and blast away with Power Strike, and even so, damage output was pretty shallow. Lister and his ilk took quite a while. My Valk and defense were major assistants, but still had to play Ring Around the Rosie to single them out. But eventually powered through them. Bale was surprisingly painless, if not prolonged, and the combo of poison and power drained his health relatively consistently. There wasn't too much spamming or too many complaints overall. I took him down with only one trip to town. And wouldn't you know it, he actually dropped Worm Skull, adding to my poison output. Overall, the Javazon absolutely destroyed normal. Before moving on to Nightmare, I felt the need to replace my hoarded items with found-only ones, so I jumped into Cows and Terrors to gear up. I found some Reggae Serpent skin in Act 5 and decided it was time for an updated stealth. Then it was off to the farmland, which to be honest wasn't too sure what I was looking for in here. Definitely not items. I think this was just a vanity project for my poison build. But whatever. It worked great versus the cows, and was pretty entertaining to watch them all fall down. I pulled some magic find to assist in my terrorized gear hunt, which unfortunately didn't yield very good results. I found another poison charm, a 3-socket armor base for peace, Sanders boots, which are actually pretty solid for what they are. But then I remembered, I'm the Javazon. I don't need no stinking gear. So I removed everything I didn't have replacements for and ventured into Nightmare. Still missing a couple pieces of gear from my found-only attempt, I gambled for a shield and some gloves, which turned out decent with some resistances, and off I went. And right away, poison was hit or miss. Devilkins, beasts, and rogues drop fairly easily, with unique beast mobs being a bit slower simply due to their health. But enemies like skeletons and zombies with natural poison resistance required Power Strike to come in as a replacement. And in tighter areas like the barracks and jail, I really had to work my way around poison res mobs as I simply could not stand and tank damage. And because of this, didn't handle ambushes very well either. But when I had the range and opportunities to fire off jabs and let the poison work, even Might Aura goat herds were melted down to nothing. So there certainly was a balancing act to note here. After the jail, I decided the time for peace had arrived. I moved a few easy-to-find runes over and then set them into the 3-socket Gothic armor. And down the catacombs I went, where I realized I probably needed more points into poison. It was working, but quite slowly, and needed Power Strike to clean up most every tainted, banished, and spider mob I came across, which had me a bit worried about Indariel. But to my surprise, I knocked the first half of her health away rather quickly. I definitely have the Peace Valk as a distraction to thank for that. My Valk skill is still far too low, and Andy squashed her like a cockroach, and forced me to play tag the rest of the battle. But the combo of consistent poison and some power strikes finished her off without too much trouble. And with the skill point now earned and poison damage in mind, I put the point to Power Strike. Genius gameplay at work here. On to Act 2. Feeling pretty good about my gear, I started with bum rushing the sewers for a skill point, and powered through fairly well. Sand Raiders mostly melted from poison, and where poison lacked, lightning damage made up for it. But this devastation absolutely relied on chugging full meals of mana potions. Once I got into the desert and was able to stretch my legs, poison became an absolute menace to society. This was by far the most relaxed time I think I've ever had through the Maggot Lair. Pierce opened up its potential and cleared hallways before I even knew what was down them. I briefly poked around the Lost City, but it wasn't really worth it, so I hightailed it over to the Viper Temple, where I actually found a decent circlet. It turned into a game of cat and mouse, with Vipers falling to poison and Embalm being resistant to it. I tried avoiding the Embalmed and taking out the Vipers as much as possible, which turned out well. Luckily, I found level 2 rather quickly and handled Fangskin without issue. The palace took a few minutes because of the poison res skeletons, and with my fragile self being vulnerable to Uradars, I did not want to play body retrieval in all of this and carefully made my way through. However, the Arcane was the exact opposite, as the long pathways and enemy groups allowed me to line them up and knock them down, group by group. While Tarash's tomb was again a flip side, which required me to power strike skeletons one by one since poison was essentially useless here. And this indeed took a while, but eventually found the orifice and challenged Uriel, which somehow went as good as it possibly could have. Duriel immediately locked onto my Peace Valk and was unable to take her down, which allowed me to launch off entire stocks of poison at him. It definitely wasn't the quickest method, but it was certainly effective. And my slow-acting poison eventually got the better of him. But only got a decent belt for my troubles. With my throwers still somewhat lacking overall, I was hoping for an easy time through Act 3 after some of the slug outs of Act 2's immunities. And now with 14 points into Plague Jav, Act 3 was indeed by far and large a complete breeze. Hulks were nearly taken down with just a single jab throw. Spiders were also very easily dispatched with. And that's nothing compared to the wakes upon wakes of flayers that fell. I reached Stormtree in about 40 minutes and utterly savaged him. I only bothered with Karas for the waypoints and Ruin Temple, which was simply handled with glorious poison. I continued to push Plague Jav as I entered the Travancore, and maybe bit off more exploration than I could chew here. But the joke was on them as my poison chewed through all of them. I re-engaged the High Council at the top steps and murked them off rather easily. Traveling through the Durance was pretty annoying, but that's primarily because of these damn Steigen dolls. Cardavers were all but immune to poison, but were slow enough for Power Strike to take them. Whoa, whoa, hey, whoa now, what's all this? Hey now, this ain't cool. Holy macaroni, he's fast. Okay, that one caught me off guard. After clearing level 3 with a high velocity combo of poison and power, Mephisto was next, and went about the same as Duriel, only without a reliable distraction. I kept my distance and heaved off javelins as fast as I could, letting poison do its job. And his health loss was consistent, if not still a bit slow. But after only 2/3 a stack of javelins, Mephisto was defeated, and actually got a slightly better javelin as a reward. Finally! Act 3 was ran through with surprising ease. I knew I was going to run into poison immunity at some point, and that point arrived in Act 4. Not from the Doom Knights, not from the Stormcasters, nor the Flesh Beasts. No. From the Venom Lords. The goddamn Venom Lords. I had no idea how I was going to handle these guys. I had to kite them all out for mano-y-manos, which still took some effort. But man, when I say everything else got handled, I mean they got handled. The city and river were ripped apart. I fought my way through the river to the waypoint, and destroyed the welcoming party waiting for me at the Chaos Sanctuary. To my detriment though, Venom Lords reappeared and made progress consistent spikes of relentless destruction to tippy-toeing around on glass. Infector was just painful. Jeez. With the final seal finally hit, Diablo was summoned. And wow, does he know how to tank poison damage. This was gonna take a while. My low HP did not exactly instill confidence to jump in and out for power strikes, so I was stuck with what I knew would work, keeping a distance and launching poison at him. It took lots of dodging, almost 120 spears, and tons of poison stacking. But Diablo was whittled down and defeated. Didn't get anything for it though. The Pelum was terrible, by the way. In returning to the fortress, I completely forgot about my skill points from defeating Azul. I used them to max out Plague Jav, which now did 621 to 632 poison damage per second, and headed into Act 5. This was my final act with poison, and if the previous acts were appetizers in how poison immunities affect the Javazon, Act 5 was the steak dinner. It started very strong since maxed out Plague Jav now became fire and forget missiles. I blasted my way to Shank, murdering everything around me. Granted, one of these bastards almost got lucky, but Eldritch didn't even get a chance to face me before he seeped to his demise. For some context, here's an evil hut with a good amount of HP. Melted. I just couldn't get surrounded. But otherwise, poison was working good. Until it wasn't. The demons still fell, but skeletons did not. And they were overwhelming. I could single out some with Power Strike, but I mean, come on. There's no way I'm getting up those stairs. So the plateau was to be skipped. Until I reached Thresh Socket, who simply melted. And this was the pattern henceforth. Non-poison res or immune enemies disintegrated before my eyes, while poison immunities were chipped away one by one with lightning. The difference between immune and not was so vast, I actually laughed out loud at how quickly Frozenstein was beaten. Then, of course, the tide shifted back in Neela's temple, since the primary enemies are poison resistant. Luckily though, they only appeared on level 1. Entering the Halls of Pain, they were indeed painful. But not for me!
You're locked in here with me!
Up goes the Flayer. Probably the most delightful run of the Halls of Pain I've ever had. Neelathak also was no problem. Glacier Trail, though, was a problem. I started by dropping Minotaurs with poison, but ended up just running through because skeletons could not be. I heaved off jabs left and right, and whoever it killed, it killed. The Tundra, though, was no match for poison, and was into the Ancient's Way before I knew it. Which, unfortunately, was a replica of the Glacier Trail, so I melted who I could and blew past who I couldn't. I found the waypoint, located on the opposite side of the summit, of course. Carefully distributed my backup potions, and summoned the Ancients, where they were all immediately attracted to my Valk. They all remain largely stationary to attack her, seeping in my ooze of green stank. And they stayed there for basically the entire battle. First Madwick fell, then Korlik. Alec was a bit tougher with poison, but I powered him down. I poisoned my way through the keep, melting everything, and was standing in front of Bale once again. Poison worked great when it could, but poison immune was detrimental. I had no idea how I was going to handle Ventar, so I bailed to gather my thoughts. And to my complete surprise, he alone chased me down here. I soloed him out, but also began to notice Power Strike without synergies had begun to teeter out on damage. And somehow I lucked out with Lister kiting himself as well, and took complete advantage, albeit slowly. With his minions dispatched, I chased after Bale. He's always particularly annoying with his Cold Wave and Mana Burn, but was really spamming them here. And poison was now incredibly slow acting. But I'll be damned if I wasn't persistent with it. Jab after jab after jab after jab. Heaving and throwing with all my might, I engulfed Bale in my noxious fumes. He tried to escape, but couldn't, as my poison set in for his final breath. And was actually rewarded with a worthy thrower. But before hell, there is a farm to check on. Also wanted to provide some kind of comparison from poison to lightning, and the Moo Moo seemed like a good place for it. And it definitely was fun amassing a herd of cows, rounding them all up, and engulfing them all in poison fumes to fall one by one. But poison had become very slow. I probably could have pushed forward with poison for a bit, but if I was somewhat struggling here, I knew I'd be in trouble by Act 2. So, it was time for that respec. I spread my points between the 5 lightning skills, with Power Strike, Charge Strike, and Lightning Fury receiving the bulk, and jumped back into cows. Right away I tried out my new skills and... oh, whoops. I forgot the Amazon is as structured as a wet piece of paper. But once I got a hold of myself, I blasted lightning off like Zeus himself. And found a pretty solid druid circlet. I'm just not a druid. I definitely needed some extra points into it, but by far and large, I began to understand the appeal of lightning Javazons. And it was on to hell. And right away, it started to look good. Oh hey, humongous. That's fun. I ran through the den for a skill point and a temperature check for my skills and seemed I was doing solid damage. Until something hit me. But cleared the den regardless and moved on to my primary blocker. Lightning immunities. This might be rough. The Stony Field doubled down on that with lightning immunity everywhere. I simply couldn't hang. My jab melee without lightning damage was way too weak to stand toe-to-toe and I had to run past. Rekinishu did remind me though that lightning would be awesome minus the immunities. The passage finally allowed me to open up the taps. I poured lightning everywhere and it was glorious. But man, talk about not being able to take a hit. Which brings me to the Javazon's categorization. A glass cannon. Insane damage, but shatters very easily. With that caution thrown to the wind, I approached Treehead's mob for some melee action, and felled them without issue. After storming through Tristram, I leveled right away in the marsh and had another point hoarded. I knew lightning immunity was abundant in hell, and lacking a normal attack would probably suck moving forward. So I invested a little in Fen to at least have something. But geez, lightning immune was really going to suck. I pushed into the barracks where Lightning Strike showed its potential and made use of Fury to delightful outcomes. The jail was completely destroyed, while the catacombs had to be navigated with great care and precision. Or running away. But reached level 4, began to approach Andariel, and immediately ran into a problem. Lightning immune afflicted. God damn it. Out of sheer frustration, I launched brute force at them, which actually worked. Ran up on Andariel again, and oh hey look, a whole bunch more. I performed a successful kite with only one afflicted following. Finished him off, and no wait, 2 more followed. This really wasn't going how it was supposed to. I finally got to solo her, and man, maybe it was easier the other way. My dex was not good. I landed a couple of higher end strikes, but this was mostly a battle over nickels and dimes. I finally lobbed jabs off for the better hit rate, and eventually wore her down. Certainly an interesting fight this one was, with interesting rewards as well. All gems? Alright, well, to the desert! But first, I needed some better support gear. My survivability was terrible. Let's see. A lidless eye for mana, Tiamat's for some all-res, ear string for damage reduction. I'll hold off on going full Shaco and do a peasant crown for now. Some war trabs just because, and blood fist for some life and recovery. I started with the sewers for another skill point, and absolutely destroyed it. I came across Radaman's mob and initially ran away, but then I remembered, the Javazon, bitch! And rushed in to destroy him. I got my skill book and found a great source amulet in the process. I'm not a sorceress. Thanks, drop chances. I then ventured into the desert and initially was looking good. But the far oasis is where I realized Act 2 was going to be hell. The scarabs are immune to lightning, which meant the maggot layer was... yeah. Wait, oh shit, uh-oh. Attack, attack, I can't damage. Fail. Okay. I'm going to have to do something I didn't want to do. I need a spear. And I don't want to grind for one. It feels like cheating, but I brought over Hone Sundan and Lycander's Pike, just for the areas I literally cannot get through. I also decided it was finally time for a Merc, and equipped Laharis with the Act 2 essentials. I went with Sundan first in an attempt to not be OP, which functioned fine. The crushing blow wasn't overwhelming and was able to manage the maggot layer. Barely. I'll spare you the details, but it was not a quick endeavor. I blew through the Lost City without issue, losing my Merc along the way. But then again, I'm the Javazon. I don't need no stinking Merc. The Viper Temple was easily cleared, but ran into tons of trouble in the palace. Archers were wrecking me. I tried to run past, which didn't work. Deciding this wasn't the way, I went around to the other stairs from the level above. But they all found me anyway. I finally trudged my way through to the Arcane, where the contrast in difficulty was actually hilarious. I zapped everyone in the Arcane. I essentially walked my way through. The high health crushers checked me hard in the canyon though, so I skipped them. And descended Talrash's tomb, where lightning immune was surprisingly non-existent, and mowed everything down. After some searching, I found the big slug's orifice and prayed my Valk could handle it. And she could not. But his attention shifted from me to her enough to balance it pretty well, and was able to avoid being overwhelmed. After some running around and potion guzzling, Duriel was defeated. After the immune absurdity of Act 2, I'd really hoped for a repeat of Nightmare's nice and easy time through Act 3, which, of course, was not the case. The Spider Cavern was the only area that wasn't lightning immune. I was even solid at 1 HP. When I realized Soul Killers were lightning immune though, I knew the jungle would be interesting. I flattened some packs of flayers while others rushed me. Luckily, I found the waypoint and dungeon right next to each other. Unluckily, the entire area was swarming with Soul Killers. Little bastards. Fortunately, the dungeon wasn't, and I glided my way through. Then continued up the jungle where lightning completely handled Stormtree. Handled Stormtree. Handled... No! Damn it. Well. Handled Stormtree. And into Kurast, where I then handled the Ruined Temple. Handled the Ruined Temple. Handled the... Okay, sometimes you gotta do what you gotta do. The rest of Kurast was light work aside from the sewers, for no other reason than I ran an entire circuit around it to find level 2. I reached the Travancore, surprisingly unopposed, hit the waypoint and returned for the High Council, and upon initial engagement, was immediately destroyed. Upon returning for my body, I singled out the members and with some effort took them down. Charging the temple for the others, I accidentally pulled a lightning immune zealot. Then a whole bunch more. Fear not, it gets worse. Climbing up to defeat the final member, I entered the Durance, where my sanity was to be harshly tested. It started fine, and found level 2 right away. However, Maulers showed up and were lightning immune. Great. And they were everywhere. In a bid to escape this particular encounter, I ran through the wrong door.
It was at this moment that he knew. He fucked up.
Running blindly through undiscovered Durance halls cursed with amp damage, I hoped for a waypoint miracle here, but only found my inevitable demise instead. Genius gameplay at work here. I didn't want to lose more experience in attempts to retrieve my body, so I cut my losses and reset. Level 1 was the same, just took longer to find level 2, and should have taken this lag as more of a warning. Level 2 was indeed a labyrinth of hatred, Ballers were all over and had explored much of the map with no waypoint nor level 3 yet. I cornered the area where they probably were, and... God damn it, Blizzard. Just... God damn it. And you killed me? Awesome. Fucking always doing this bullshit. I swear to God, this doesn't happen in any other game I ever play. This only fucking happens in Diablo 2. Anyway, so back to the Durance again. Laharis couldn't stay alive, and I wasn't using him. So I opted for some fire support with Vanjie instead. And it wasted no time throwing champion maulers at me within the second room, and a unique mob 2 rooms over. Mercilessly, I fought through the entirety of level 1 and 2 before I found the waypoint and level 3, which took the better part of 35 minutes. I didn't want to mess around at all in level 3, so I blasted around most of the enemies, but carved out a little safe space just in case. But Mephisto surprisingly wasn't as bad as I thought he'd be. I started by throwing, but wasn't doing the damage I wanted to, so I rushed him instead. He definitely landed some hard hits, but Power Strike did much more damage than throwing, so I toughed it out. As it turned out, I was actually able to stand toe-to-toe and tank his damage. A few times I had to jump out to heal, Rejuves had me right back in it, and with much persistence. Mephisto's Soul Stone was mine. Act 4, Act 4. Oh, how you come knocking on my back door. The amount of health I needed to cut down was enormous. Up close was a suicide mission at this point, so it was a fire away as fast as I could situation. And during these engagements with Fury, I noticed something just seemed off. When I returned to town, I realized with absolute horror what I had forgotten to do. I don't have Pierce.
What? What the fuck?
I don't know how I didn't notice this before. It was supposed to be the final skill I hit when respecking to lightning, but I completely forgot about it. After I realized I had been kicking myself in the balls for 3 full acts, I made a beeline to Azul for some points. Azul made his own laggy beeline right to me. For my merc, Valk and I proceeded to straight jump his ass. I immediately went back to town and threw a point to Pierce without even thinking. And returned to my worst nightmare. Of course, burning souls. I needed lightning res. Badly. I should have had Blackhorn and Storm Chaser on standby already, but they're gonna come into play now. I returned to the task at hand and realized what I had been missing without piercing. This probably would have made Act 3 a bit easier. Granted, that didn't solve my lightning immune issue. And with no souls this time around, go figure, I now wreaked havoc all the way to the city and into the River of Flame. After blasting through a couple mobs, I set upon my first true melting session, which made me smile. Glorious. I isolated Hephasto and destroyed the Soul Stone, and only got a lum? Man, shafted. In any case, I eventually found the waypoint, painstakingly crossed the causeway, entered the sanctuary, and took it to him. Stormcasters were the only real speed bump. I then went for the ultimate test of cojones.
Zeus stabs the sky with thunderbolts.
Woo! I had the skin of my teeth. The final seal was hit to summon the beast for the last time. I started by launching spears at him, which seemed to lack damage, so I went in for Power Strike, and knocked off some decent portions of health. But I missed tons of strikes as well. So I bailed back out and opted for range. I realized I still had Blackhorns on, which may have inadvertently been a handicap from my end here with slow target. But I felt my distance and dodging was enough to not make much of a difference. After hopping, skipping, and stepping around him, I eventually wore down the beast. And hot damn, a Balrog spear. and much better than my current one. Diablo for the win for a change. Going into the final act, my resistances were shit, but felt somewhat confident with my Balrog Spear. I didn't get too far out of the gate before I realized I really needed some poison res. So I jumped back, jacked it up, nullifying my new Jav for now, and headed back out. Where my lightning conquered. No mob stood a chance, and Shenk was destroyed. Something gnawed at me to check this magical Cymbalan though. I don't know what could possibly make it work. Oh my. +2 to Amazon skills? With lightning damage? What? It actually provided more skill damage. Sweet. Hoping I was out of poison danger, I switched back to Saracens and my rare ring, and proceeded to blast through the highlands as well as the plateau. Fresh Socket took a few minutes this time though. I entered the passage and hoped for no Minotaurs. And there were none. There wasn't any lightning immune for that matter. So you know what that meant. I even felt confident enough for some dumb shit like popping open an evil urn, which is likely... Yep. Handled. It wasn't even fair versus Frozenstein. This, however, piqued my greatness for now, as it went a bit downhill in Neela's Temple. Scarabs. Great. Fine, I'll just run past them. But Night Lords. Shit. There's no way I could take them all out, and tried to skirt past, and was actually able to and started to feel a bit at ease. I blasted my way to the waypoint and charged down to the Halls of Vought, which required some careful dodging. And definitely required not getting stuck and dying.
He fucked up.
Which is exactly what I did. There was no way. I gave it a try and was nailed by a corpse explosion. Next try, I got my body back and did some damage in return. But turned out Neela was lightning immune. Of course he was. I tried this longer than I wanted to admit. I finally decided enough was enough and tried to collect my bodies before bailing, which was not easy. In fact, I couldn't do it and ended up losing some experience. Shame. Luckily, my +2 Amazon skill spear returned, but I did lose my Balrog spear from my original body that I couldn't finish picking up. Damn it. I decided I didn't need Anya to personalize an item for me and skipped Neela's Temple for the Glacier Trail, where I ate my way through. Popping out at the frozen tundra, the waypoint showed up right away and melted the tundra apart. I was quite unlucky in the Ancient's Way, however, with Night Lords and Afflicted camped out. I decided this wasn't fair, so I went back for Lycander's Pike, and even that fell short. I was getting nowhere fast. I took a chance and reset, where I actually came across Natalia's totem off the rip. Some all-res, mega strength and dex with better defense. I'll take it. I pushed back into the Ancient's Way, where lightning immune was still prevalent, but much more manageable. With the waypoint and summit found, I stashed Lycanders and prepped for the Ancients, and engaged them fairly well. I moved and grooved my way around them, and wore Corlic and Talic down at a reasonable rate, with Madwick being lightning immune. Talic was first to fall, almost nailing me on his way out. Corlic dropped soon after, leaving only a Stabathon with Madwick. I slowly but surely made progress, then it would be off to... Wait, what? Oh, come on! Let's try that again. Upon running back again, I was actually graced with another Pelum, which was better than my current rare, with insane attack rating and life and mana leech. A decent consolation prize, I suppose. I again roughed through the Ancients, paid no attention to the incoming notifications, and found the summit. This time, with some understanding of what to expect and Lycanders equipped for the immunity, I felt confident setting up and summoned the Ancients. But That's not all I summoned. The clone! No freaking way. A boss level 4v1? Nah, I didn't sign up for this. Reset. Does he spawn again? Phew. Okay, no. Anyway, the Ancients were handled same as before. Blasted Lightning Fury at the two non-immunities and stabbed away with Fend at the immune, which went better with Lycanders. But caution was still required as Madwick easily cut my health down. But with lots of running and dodging, Hell Ancients were defeated, and it was on to the final dungeon, which did take some effort to get through, but surprisingly nothing too rough. Level 4 was eventually found, and I cut my way to Bale. I was cautiously curious who would be lightning immune here. Not Kalenzo. Not Akmel. Not Bartok. Definitely not Ventar. Lister's gotta be tough though, right? Nope. Not Lister either. I actually sat there and chuckled for a second at the record time I had just defeated Hell Bale's minions in. Bale himself, though, was a total meat sack. It took so much firepower to bring him down. Jab after jab after stab after stab after jab after stab. I was quite thankful for cannot be frozen here, and restocks on jabs and potions occurred a couple times. I finally cornered him where Fury ricocheted off the wall behind him, which hit him a second time with each throw. By the time he figured it out, it was too late. I rushed him with Lycanders, and Bale, Lord of Destruction, fell before me. But we're not done just yet. Oh no, there is more to do. A faint sound to a secret area shrouded in mystery. Of course the uniques are lightning immune though. But back to it. Right, I forgot. Glass cannon. This was actually hilarious fun, and the appeal of the lightning Javazon had been fully realized. I noticed the catacombs were now terrorized, so I finished up cows and leaped into the fray. I didn't want to spend too much time in the catacombs itself, for reasons. But its tricky navigation meant I can only get down and defeat Andy 3 times. They weren't the quickest battles either, but they weren't exactly dangerous as long as I kept on the move. For non-boss terror zones, it all came down to who was lightning immune and who wasn't. Anything without lightning immunity was roasted immediately and with barely any effort. However, immunes were tough. And in some cases, when doubled up in tight-knit passages and caverns like the Ancient's Way, it was downright impossible. At least without better gear. I decided to skip this area, and while clearing out and resorting some stashes, I actually found a pair of Javskiller charms on another Amazon I started ages ago. No shit. At this point, it was time to go full Shaco. Now doing over 7,000 for Power Strike, I jump back into terror zones all like... and the enemy's reaction was appropriate. Lightning immune was still frustrating, but Fen was now manageable with my Jav. For comparison, I swapped to my Reggae gear and removed the Skillers, removing a full 10 points from Fury and Lightning, and 7 from Power, to which I still melted everything. Not in quite as one-shot fashion, but still the only struggle were Lightning immunes. Good zones were tough to come across, but I ran through the sewers, the jail, Crystalline Passage, and Talrash's Tomb with just my added belt and didn't run into really any issues. Granted, I re-equipped Lycanders. Lightning Fury, Lightning Strike and Power Strike were all absolutely OP. Nothing stood even the slightest chance. In Talrash's Tomb, though, I did finally come across my first fully impossible enemy. Lightning and physical immune. There was just no way with this one. But once you work your way around immune enemies, you will destroy everything. Overall, the Javazon was a tale of two extremes. Some enemies were absolutely destroyed, while others were the ones doing the destroying. It almost didn't even matter what kind of javelin was used, likely going for ones with higher stack quantities for the sake of not returning to town. The most important thing seemed to be skill stacking. My magical +2 skill jab ended up doing more damage than my rare Great Pelum from Diablo. Some defensive perks were all but required though, such as Cannot Be Frozen and a solid shield. But immunities were an immediate blocker, and no amount of lightning skill stacking would help. A spear with Fen was required to get through several areas, and sometimes not even so. But in the end, I'm left with somewhat mixed feelings about the Javazon. I very much enjoyed lobbing lightning off and clearing areas in record time, but very much did not enjoy the snail-like speed of melee engagements. Going from no work required to all the work required. I didn't dislike the Javazon, and do have some Hell Cow level grinding in mind coming up, but all cards on the table, I can't say the Javazon was my favorite character. If you made it to the end, my sincerest thank yous. When I started putting this video together, I told myself this was not going to be another 7,000 word, 45-minute plus video essay on a single Diablo 2 playthrough, like my magical only video was. But hey, here we are. But I hope you enjoyed watching as much as I enjoyed putting it together. And feel free to share any thoughts in the comments. How often do you play the Javazon? Is she one of your favorite characters or one of your least favorite? If you enjoyed this playthrough, consider smashing that like button. And remember to subscribe for more fun Diablo and other gameplay run-throughs, challenges, and analytics. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you on the next one. Adios.